I'm actually going to. All right. Welcome, everybody, to our December edition of Community and Conversation. My name is Tanisha Johnson, and I am the Executive Director of BLM New Hampshire. If you're not familiar, we do these every month. The third, is this the third Tuesday?
Up there.
Yep, the third Tuesday of the month. And the point of these is to really bring our community partners in and talk about what's going on in our community locally, but also nationally. And just what do we need to do? What we need to be focused on? What do we need to provide support services for? And then go from there. So tonight, I am excited to have my newfound bestie. We were recently at a conference together, and just had formed a friendship, right? We kept, doing our thing. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and where you're from and tell us about your organization.
Yeah. My name is Louis Esposito. I am the executive director of ABLE New Hampshire. And ABLE New Hampshire is a disability justice advocacy organization. ABLE stands for Advocates Building Lasting Equality. And what we do is we are a grassroots organization that addresses systematic barriers that people with disabilities face throughout their state, local, and federal governments. And we primarily do that through our task forces, where we address larger issues and we try to partner with other organizations that are doing similar work, just and provide a disability perspective and a disability voice to it. So our ultimate goal is not to recreate the wheel, but to provide disability a location and a larger voice. So we advocate by promoting our members and to be these voices at these various settings. And we're all over the place right now. We are addressing so many issues. I'm sure you all are as well. Anything ranging from oral health care. We were one of the organizations that really helped spearhead the New Hampshire Smiles Adult Dental Medicaid from a few years back. We are also focusing on Medicaid right now in our state, civic engagement, voting rights of people with disabilities, housing, transportation, the dual diagnosis, mental health. People that are diagnosed with autism and mental health oftentimes don't get appropriate care. And also education and supportive education, which we call supportive education, but it's more commonly known as special education. And I say that for a very specific reason. I don't feel, and many of us don't feel, that the word special really should be defined as just what people with disabilities, what makes everyone should be special, or no one should be special at all, right? So we are all over the place. We have chapters at the Seacoast, not too far from where you all are located. And we have a chapter that just opened up here in Nashua, and looking to grow our presence all throughout the state to focus on more localized issues. One of the things we found specifically is we need to train our advocates and provide voices at various municipalities and local hearings and meetings. So that's us in a nutshell. We are a very energetic group and we're growing pretty fast right now. We've doubled our membership in about a year and a half
Mhm.
and still continuing to grow. So I'm really excited for this conversation. I know Tanisha and I have had some great talks behind the scenes about how our organizations need to partner more because there is a very strong intersectionality between disability and race.
Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to exploring that more with you all today.
So tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be a member of Able New Hampshire?
We have different membership levels. A lot of people will just give us, a membership dues for a month or for a year. But what we're really looking for is advocates to come to the table, and we provide the platform and the reach, so they
Mhm.
could provide their do their advocacy work. So ABLE was founded on that principle. We were founded off of graduates from the Institute on Disabilities Leadership Series. And it was a group of people and volunteers that really wanted to continue with their advocacy work outside of their leadership group. And they formed ABLE, a nonprofit, and started off slow with non-paying members and kind of grew from there. So most of our members are non-paying. We just ask for them to participate in one of our initiatives or create their own initiative. So
Mhm.
people will come up and say, "Hey, I'm really worried about housing for my son or my daughter. moving forward. And this is kind of what I like. And as long as it aligns with Able's mission and goals, we will help them kind of fulfill that and provide that infrastructure to help create it.
Yeah. So, what are some of the misconceptions about disability? Because I have been in a lot of conversations with different folks, and some folks feel some disabilities are not true disabilities. If they can't see it or they can't hear it, they're like, that doesn't count. So, tell me, what are some of those, and how do you
Yeah.
combat that?
I love that conversation and really just it brings up just so much. But disability to me and it's a form of diversity, right?
Hmm.
It's everyone experiences disability in a different way. And really what we promote is what's called a social model of disability. And I'm gonna go over that a little bit. Can I share my screen real fast, if that's
You
okay?
sure can. Let me allow it.
Yeah,
You should be good.
there we go. Perfect. I'm gonna pop this up and hopefully you all can see it. Um, but really what the social model of disability, it views disability not as a negative deficit on somebody. We have this misconception that disability is a diagnosis, which is kind of what you brought up. You know, you're diagnosed as having an individual impairment of some sorts. But in reality, what we see disability as is a social construction that is imposed by the parents of the society, not as the individual. So a lot of the times in medical model, what we try to do is we try to fix the disability. And we see that in a lot of different systems, right? If you look at special education, for example, supportive education, and you look at an IEP, you're diagnosed with a deficit in academics. You are diagnosed with you are given a year-long IEP, which is focused on fixing that disability with services to support you. And conceptually, you know, it reflects that negative because it really ties in that the person has the problem itself, when in
Mhm.
reality, the system has a problem. So we feel very strongly that if there are, if barriers were decreased and that there was more accessibility and design for people with disability in mind, that the disability or the impairment wouldn't have such a larger or have such a negative effect on the individual. So does that make sense?
That
So
makes complete sense.
if you move a little bit beyond what a disability is, it's, you know, it could be defined in many ways, and people, according to their supports, really experience it in different ways. So, a great example is my friend Kathy Bates. She talks about this. She lives not too far from you. She works at the IOD, and she has some great series, and she's amazing, and I love her to death.
Mm-hmm.
But her whole entire house is set up in a way that is accessible to her. She could cook independently. She could access her support outside the building. She could go to the store. She could go to various locations. However, when she is feeling the disability is when she goes to a location and she's not able to get into the building because there's no accessibility ramp. Or she's not able, if she was ever in my home is not designed for a wheelchair user. She wouldn't be able to get in. She wouldn't be able to cook. She wouldn't be able to go upstairs. She wouldn't be able to go hang out on the portrait wing, you know, and those were where my house is not designed in that way. So what we're trying to do, if you amplify that to a larger message, really create a society where accessibility is at the front of everyone's mind, so
Mm-hmm.
that people wouldn't experience that barrier, regardless of physical ability or not.
Gotcha. Okay. So really, we need to reframe our thinking, because for so long we have framed our thinking around the disability as a problem with the person, and it's really our ability to address those disabilities and not
Exactly.
those barriers. Yeah. Hmm.
If we start viewing not just not if you start viewing disability as a social construction, you start realizing that it's our society that is needs to improve, not the individual.
Hmm. We could like really take this conversation and go so many different layers
Yes.
just on that statement alone.
Well, and
But
that's where the intersectionality comes in,
yes,
right? Like
yes.
I know that when you look at concepts of critical race theory, it's
Hmm.
very similar to critical disability studies theory. And it's not the race that you know it's not the individual, it's how society views that individual.
Yes.
And it's a very similar with disability.
What is critical disabilities theory? For those of us or y'all
I
who
could
may not know.
I could nerd out to this for quite a while, but it's a series. It's a theological frame. It's a thematic framework that researchers design their studies based around it, and
Hmm.
it views exactly that. It views things through like the social construction theory, right?
Hmm.
How disability is viewed as a form of diversity, as the individual disability is not the impairment itself, but it's the impairment of our society that's creating the disability experience.
Hmm.
And yeah, there are times where having a particular disability might affect, especially with health wise. But if we have the right supports and structure and care for somebody, then we wouldn't have that experience as significant as it is. It's not a deficit, and you can really amplify that really starting at a young age. And I know we're going to get into education a little bit
Hmm.
later, but it
Hmm.
really starts young, where students are told like there's something wrong with how you view things or how you see. Like you're wearing glasses right now, right? That's an accommodation.
Right.
If this screen was not accessible to you, you wouldn't be able to perform. It's very similar.
Hmm. So we use the terms lately in the world. We use justice a lot,
Mhm.
though it's the word that we're not supposed to say with DEIJ. However, we talk a lot about disability rights versus disability justice. And
Yeah.
not a lot of folks understand the transition or the change in that. So, what is your view on disability rights versus justice, and what does Able New Hampshire do with that?
I mean, we partner very closely with disability rights centers and organizations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to us, I feel that disability rights are the current making sure that the current laws that we have in place are being followed. The Americans with Disability Act, the Olmstead Act, and IDEA, and there's numerous others.
Mm-hmm.
Disability justice is what we should be striving for because even those laws, they are groundbreaking and they move the needle. There's still a lot more work to go, and we need to keep pushing. We just can't accept that
Mm-hmm.
disability rights, this is just what we have. We need to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So it's more where we currently stand and making sure that the rights that we and the laws that we have in place are being followed. But justice is seeing those laws as needing to be improved and acting upon them. And that's where the advocacy work comes in, right?
Right. So justice is the systems change that we're fighting for so that we don't have to continue fighting for the rights.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So whose voice is often missing in these conversations?
Ours, disability advocates and most people with disabilities. There's a lot of different studies and research out there. And even some of the circles that we attend,
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
we went to this conference, we
Yep.
were the only disability organization that was represented. And
Mm-hmm.
we're having these really big conversations, yet we're not including the disability voice and how these major decisions are being made and these major actions and these major, progressive movements are being fulfilled. Yet at the same time, we're forgetting the disability voice in there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's people that experience it individually, like I'm thinking of, my former students or some of our able members. We want them at the forefront. We want them at the housing meetings being included. We want the voices of students with disabilities going to the table and saying how special education affects them, or the education laws that are being presented right now and how those affect them. So oftentimes it's just the individual. And people with disabilities, especially individuals with intellectual disabilities, are oftentimes don't even have a typical voice like you and I have. They have augmentative systems and they need support and technology and education to really access those things.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to amplify those voices. We need to make organizations and meetings more accessible so we could get those voices out there because, I'm thinking of we have town hall budget season coming up, right? If someone that might have sensory processing issues, being in a room of 800 people is very overwhelming in the sound, but there are accommodations that could be in place. Another huge barrier for people with disabilities is transportation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to them?
Mm-hmm.
Public transportation in our state is not great. And, it's not great in cities. It's even worse out in rural areas,
Yeah.
So how do you get to I'm from a rural area. How do you get from my house to the town hall? It's
Yeah.
15-minute drive away from me. And I have my vehicle. Some people with disabilities are not able to drive or might not have a driver's license. or their transportation system that they have in place doesn't operate after hours. And they have to really plan things out with advance and really hope that the systems that we have in place are working for them.
Mm,
And then you hear about that voice too, voting rights. I know there's a really big push. I'm not sure if we talked about it, but the All for One system, it's a disability, every local election and federal election in our state has an accessible voting location that was recently, passed. I know there was some danger about it not going out there this year, but anyone could access their public, polling station. It reads to you. You could take your time. It's an isolated area, and then you're not going to feel overwhelmed. But one of the things that we are concerned with here at Able is absentee ballots. Some people have, very significant health reasons not to go out in public, and asking for things in advance. Some people don't have driver's license. Some people don't have access to go to the town hall to get a certified, accommodation well, not accommodation, but the laws right now are getting more and more stringent, and disability voices kind of feeling weakened right now.
but why do we dismiss or forget the disability's voice? Because it should be just as important, right? It should always be in the priority list. And
Yeah,
but it's often not. So why do you think that is?
I think there's oftentimes it's I don't want to say it. I was even having this conversation. I was thinking in my head how I wanted to respond to this.
Hmm.
To me, it comes natural, and not natural necessarily natural, but I'm around it a lot and I experience it in different ways. But I think some people view disability as a cute charity base. We'll give them the help and the love and support, but they don't hear that voice that is really crying for change, and
Hmm.
they dismiss it often. And there's a lot of learned helplessness within, especially intellectual communities. I'll give an example. I was at an advocacy group talking, and we're just having a great conversation about what's called supported decision making. A lot of people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, don't have guardianships of themselves. They might have a family member or a public guardian ad litem, and they might not understand or fully know their rights.
Hmm.
And that's one of ABLE's goals, is to increase advocacy and increase education for people within the developmental disability system, so they understand and know their rights and can speak out. But it's not often taught for people with disabilities,
Right.
especially those that are in isolated classrooms, that are in special education, and they're kept away from other segregated areas, and often spoken for, not spoken to or with.
Hmm. So speaking of that, there's a lot going on. It is now legislative season.
Yeah.
LSRs are coming out, House bills are coming out, things about public education. There's so much, right? We could even have a whole just series just on what's coming out that either we need to support or that we need to make sure is vetoed. What's going on with disability in the House bills and the LSRs?
It's like cleaning windows when there's a pigeon on the roof, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, right now, at Able, and I made a little slide for this too.
Ooh.
We are, where is it? Content only. Here we go.
Hmm.
We're tracking a total of 471 bills that are disability related.
Wow.
And
471 just in New Hampshire.
just in New Hampshire. And once we get the language, we'll narrow them down a bit.
Right.
But disability touches so many areas of our lives. It's the one minority group that anyone could enter at any given moment.
Mm,
Whether it's a traumatic brain injury, or as you get older, that a lot of older, you experience disability when you get older, or you
mm-hmm,
might have a loved one down the line that has a disability.
mm-hmm,
Education, we're addressing things like budget caps, and these are the grand general education budget caps,
mm-hmm,
EFA expansion, DEI bans. One of our big tenets is inclusion. And there's a big I right at the end of that DEI statement, right? And
mm-hmm,
how do we have programs like unified sports and specialized services when that is part of disability rights? I mean,
mm-hmm,
funding. We are very inappropriately being targeted. Special education funding is being targeted specifically because, and you hear it at all your local town meetings right now, special ed funding is too much. We're spending too much money. But specifically for supportive education, some of these bills I'm highlighting right now, There's a restraint bill this year. They want to increase restraint and seclusion for students and make it as an appropriate um, uh, uh, tool for teachers, which is very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They also want to look at the financial obligation of students that might be expelled. And we talked about the intersectionality, right? We'll get more into that in a little bit. But if you're being committing an assault on against a school staff member, you would be expelled, and you think that doesn't sound so bad. But a lot of students with disability experiences emotional disability,
Right.
intellectual disability, and communication is a huge barrier. And one of the first emotions that comes out when you're not being heard is frustration. And if you have limited, if you need support, hitting somebody. I mean, in my education career, I've been bit, kicked, yelled at
Right.
many times, and I can't imagine my students being expelled for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're also potentially looking at to help with the cost, making isolated, centralized areas for related services. So having a one central location between school districts where students could go get their speech, their OT, and their related services, which is going to have students coming from different districts to one isolated area. But that defeats the purpose of individualized programs and inclusive education, where you're getting those services within the general education classroom, which is going to increase seclusion and isolation even further.
Mm-hmm.
And then potentially, if you do make a law, there's a lot of IEP laws, and it can be very complicated. And a simple thing, I know, talking to some advocates over in the Nashville area recently, they were not able to provide paraprofessional support because they couldn't hire a paraprofessional in time, so their IEP was not compliant. What the DO with one law right now is looking at potentially withholding DOE funds from a whole entire district if they're not in complete compliance with the law, which is very,
Wow.
very dangerous. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to start punishing more and more schools for that. And then looking at that, potentially repealing multi-tiered MTSS, it's behavioral health supports. That's your mental health programs. That's your social emotional learning. So there's a lot of areas that we're tracking, and I haven't even got into civic engagement, voting rights, and some of these other things. I'll have a couple more. Housing, accessibility units we're focused on, looking at and these are things that we're highlighting to have the more housing options for people with disabilities. Work requirements with Medicaid is going to significantly affect our community. Medicaid changes, how we disperse funds for nonprofit residential facilities. I live two houses down from one right now, and we're going to restrict the number of residential options for people with disabilities. And one big one we fought last year that came back this one is they want to completely repeal the New Hampshire Council on Autism Spectrum Disorders, which is
Yeah.
another.
Are you serious?
Yeah, last year we tried to strengthen that organization or that council,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a bill that was trying to strengthen it. However, it was amended to repeal it completely. And I think that's a common misconception. Autism is a very wide spectrum, and this is a council dedicated for people that experience autism that might not be within the DD system itself. I do know people and loved ones that have autism, but they don't receive an IEP, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a council for them to have their voices heard. And autism's in the news quite a bit. We had our federal government's out there saying that autism is caused by Tylenol and circumcisions and every other crazy thing under the umbrella. And really, we're finding that autism is being diagnosed more and more for a variety of reasons. And accessibility being one of them. Those tests are very expensive. And then
Mm-hmm.
finally, civic engagement and civil rights. We're trying to fix quorum requirements for official councils through the state. Right now, you have to meet in person, but people, like I said before, transportation is a huge barrier. If you can't make it to a meeting because you can't get the transportation, or you have a loved one that doesn't have the proper support and you have to stay home and support them, you can't attend that meeting. So there's a lot of different things going on that we're focused on.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we're up to. And I just want to, commend, our director of policy. We're spreading more and more. Kristen Evans, I think she might be here, but we're all over the place. There's a lot to cover, but part of the things that we're trying to do is partner with other organizations. We're not the only organization that's focused on housing. We're not the only organization focused on education. So the
Right.
more we get the disability voice out there, the less like lifting we need to do, and the more we could work alongside other organizations and bring our voice to the table.
So, for those who may not know that these things are coming to the State House, how would they keep track of these things? Like, how would they even support your works?
We have a great social media page and we're looking to grow that, but I mean that's $1 million question, right?
Right?
There's a lot of times that there's so much going on. So we're
Mhm.
really prioritizing things right now as an organization and what are the areas that we really need to focus on and where can we partner and we don't want to also send a lot of our members and advocates out to the slaughterhouse and battles that they're going to lose all the
Mhm.
time. We need
Mhm.
to have some victories in as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of bills that we want to promote, and we work across the aisle and try
Mhm.
to get everybody at the same table. Like I said before, disability tends to blend a lot of issues and a lot of opinions, and we have the ability to kind of go and educate more and more and more, and hopefully, we could kind of work with legislators on both sides to kind of see our perspective on things, and see how it impacts us. And no one wants to hear my voice all the time,
Right.
and I'm
Right.
glad you all are here listening to my voice, but
Mhm.
we need to hear people with disabilities speaking out about these things.
One of the things, I think it was this week or maybe it was last week, we were in a meeting together at the education table, and we were talking about the open vouchers and the open enrollment that's happening right now. And I remember you got a little fired up
Yeah,
about open enrollment and what's happening with vouchers and how it is affecting our kiddos with disabilities. And a lot of folks were like, oh, right, didn't even think about that. So, what were you fired up about?
I get fired up easily. Um, but for open enrollment, I think it's an issue that I think we're kind of experiencing in a lot of different ways. And one of my major concerns is for students that have more significant needs and
Mhm.
functional needs,
Mhm.
um, they cost more, and inclusion costs more.
Yeah.
And when we're talking open enrollment, we're not really talking about students that have these significant and function significantly, high price tags. And they're the ones that are going to be left out of these conversations. We're not going to have, this student transfer to the next town over because they're going to be on the hook for that giant bill.
Right. Right.
Um, and we have what's called out of district placement, which you work with the IEP team to determine that that is the least restrictive environment for a student.
Mhm.
But it kind of that's federal law, right? So that kind of supersedes that open enrollment, and not
Right.
a lot of public schools have those, specific programs. But what got me really fired up was the fact that if we're taking money away from this school and
Mhm.
bringing it to another school, you're going to significantly affect the students with disabilities because of that higher price tag, right? So
Mhm.
a student might receive $25,000 of service from a school, right, per year. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. But if you move that to a different program or a different school, you're kind of taking it away from the related service providers and the special education teachers, paraprofessionals, and that like. So I'm nervous because it also views students with disabilities as more of a price tag. But
Mhm.
in reality, I think we all know, education is a civil right. And I look back at some of these long-term cases, IDEA, has direct ties to Brown versus Board of Education, where, segregation, separate but equal, that doesn't always mean separate but equal. And students with
Right.
disabilities oftentimes feel that. I think we all feel that in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And if we start pulling funds away, these poor districts that are not as well funded are going to get worse and worse and worse, and students with disabilities are going to pay the cost of it.
Yeah. And we see that a lot just with this whole voucher system. We're going to start seeing school districts suffer with either not being able to get teachers, with funding and all the things. And so the voucher program, although it sounds great to be like, oh, let me put my kiddo and have open enrollment and put my kiddo in another district that benefits them, it ended up having less benefits for those who are left, you know?
And with the voucher program, and that's a little bit different, to accept an EFA voucher, you have to sign away your right to IDEA, and you don't receive those services anymore. So
Oh, I did not know that.
and it's in the application. So a lot of students that have higher functional needs, they
Hmm.
wouldn't necessarily be applying for EFAs because if you look at the EFA, what the state will give you for it, around $5,000 for a general education and around 3,000 additional dollars
Hmm.
for it's like the disability criteria, and that's a
Hmm.
whole other topic because. What the recent housing study commission showed, there is about 200 students that would normally be that would qualify for an IEP, but about I think it was 400 or 600, 400. There's a significant portion right now. We're going to start seeing more and more of this coming out that wouldn't qualify for an IEP, but they do have a disability, and they're getting that additional 3,000. You just need a medical note from a doctor to get it.
Hmm.
And really, IEP as or IDEA has very strict guidelines that the disability has to interfere with academic progress. So, a loved one of mine, he has autism and, he doesn't qualify for an IEP, but he would qualify for that additional 3,000 if we ever pulled him out of school. And even if you did go that route, where you have your $8,000, you're going to get a lot more services at your school anyway. An assessment to get into special education oftentimes costs $2,000, $3,000 a man hours.
Yep.
If you look at school psychologists, related
Hmm.
services that are doing the assessments, just the initial kickoff is significant.
Hmm.
And, if we're talking about teacher shortages too, special education teachers throughout the state are short,
Mm.
which are only exacerbating some of the problems that the school districts are having because they can't find qualified special education teachers out there. If you look right now on Ed Jobs, you'll find a bunch of teachers
Yeah.
and a bunch of paraprofessional positions that
Hmm.
are open all throughout the state. And it's a very challenging job, and we're seeing less and less of that relationship building and more like I like to kind of put it as like a related service factory where you're sitting there with your 20 minutes and you're ringing a bell and you're bringing the next student, kind of like a therapy appointment, right? You have your 45 minutes and you go on. When
Hmm.
I was a teacher, I built my rapport and my relations. Some days I would be with my students for 2, 3 hours at a time because they were in a crisis, and then I might not see them for another few days.
Right. Hmm.
How do you note that in an IEP? Things change and students' needs kind of differ from day to day. So yeah, I
Mm.
could talk about education for quite a while.
We could, yes.
Yeah.
I am going to pivot. We got two questions that came
Yeah.
in. How can someone that struggles with mental illnesses, such as PTSD or BPD, protect themselves from losing housing or facing criminal charges while struggling?
I think it's really I mean, there's a lot of intersectionality between, a criminal justice system and disability. There's a disproportionate amount of people in our criminal system that have a disability,
Hmm.
either diagnosed or undiagnosed. I think the first step would be contacting the Disability Rights Center,
Right.
and making sure that your rights are being followed. And specifically for housing, you can't discriminate based off of disability for housing. And that's another area where we need to make sure that our resources are being utilized. So I wish I could give a better answer to that, but that's part of the problem that we're trying to fix because we do see significant gaps in that situation.
Yeah. Another question is if there are any types of bills that could be passed that would allow for a mental health clinician to respond with officers to police calls to prevent people in a mental health crisis from being detained. Seems like a lot of people in New Hampshire have been arrested lately for struggling mentally.
Yeah, I wish there was something stronger right now, but that is a great that is something that we could kind of pursue a little bit more. I'm going to steal that idea, anonymous attendee,
Mhm.
because that is a bill that we should be kind of putting out there and advocating for. But I think it all comes back to cost, right? You would have to have a social worker within your police department. And, when you see the blues come on, you don't always get this reassuring everything's, going to be okay feeling. It does cause a lot of anxiety for people.
Right.
And it might amplify, a crisis. So we'll love to see more of that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to do more work on that.
Well, and I think that that has been part of what we've been talking about when we talk about um, I want to choose my words carefully, but when we talk about abolishing the police system and redoing the structure, and it means that a lot of murders and things that have been happening, of people getting shot and killed by police that were in a mental breakdown. And so some police areas do have great social workers in there and doing that, and they bring them out with them. And then there's some that don't. And then there's also been ways that we have had teams that go out with the police troops. I think Manchester was doing it for a while. Dover, Rochester area did it. But it's not a statewide initiative, which is what concerns me because when you take away that the police being in fear of whatever that potentially could happen, in
Mhm.
their words, not mine. But when we address the mental health concerns, we're able to actually care for the person and, avoid all of the detaining. And it's concerning that that hasn't been changed.
No, and I think that's a great area we could partner closer on.
hmm We can. Look at us making lists.
I know, right?
Every time I talk to you, we're making a list.
But seriously though, like that is a huge issue, and we do know that disability affects a lot of people that are in the justice system. And if you can prevent them from getting to that point, you'll start seeing the numbers dropping.
hmm
We both have that common goal.
Yeah. So speaking of that, our common goals, let's talk about that intersectionality of race and disabilities. Um, a lot of what you've said tonight can definitely be said when we talk about racial justice and what we're fighting for within systems of oppression. And I think a lot of folks that I've heard in different circles will say, but it's still not the same. Race is one thing, disabilities is another. Race you are born with, you're born into this, you're immediately viewed this way, you're immediately into this system or this negative treatment. But we have to talk about how it intersects a lot because we're literally fighting the same causes of inclusion and breaking down the system. So, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to share this real quick.
hmm
Just some quick data. There's a disproportionate amount of segregated special education placement going on. So we were saying like that, yeah, it may not always be the same, but
hmm
3 times as many people with disabilities are people of color. And For intellectual disability, emotional disability, 2 times is more likely, and 1.5 times is more likely as learning disability. And what all these have in common, there's professionals diagnosing them, but they're more subjective. Physical disabilities are
hmm
across the board pretty much the same according to race. So when you look at it like from that perspective, there are a lot of people being diagnosed that are of color. Um, More than there should be. So something's going on in the system, right?
Right.
And disability could be a way to segregate. We face very similar issues. Disability could be a way to less than somebody, and prevent them from having their rights. And I think there is I think we see a lot of that too. But in the disability world too, we're guilty of not really, including, people of color in our community as often as we should. And I really hope we could change that
hmm
because it is something that we're missing. We look at our spaces. It is kind of alarming the more and more I'm looking and the more and more I'm observing.
hmm
But you can't talk about disability rights without equality. And I think you all are in the very similar sense, similar boat. I think we just have to merge a lot of ideas. There's going to be separate things, but it is disproportionate amount of people of color that are being diagnosed than the white folks.
hmm
So it needs to be spoken about more and more. And I think if we start viewing disability not necessarily as a negative, but as a form of diversity, I think we're going to start kind of knocking those barriers down a little bit more and more. Um, Going a little bit further, going back, I know I mentioned Brown versus Board of Education before, but it was a fight against segregation, and we're still fighting that right now. And we should be fighting that together because if we have an increase of people being segregated because of their disability, we're still having segregated education. Discipline disparities are significant. Black disabled students face disproportionate school discipline compared to others, and
hmm
that leads to the prison system, right?
hmm
Um, and then we have this IEP paradox that IEPs could be both a useful tool of support, but it also could be a barrier.
Yeah.
So for disproportionately segregating students because of the IEP, we need to really evaluate how we're making these IEPs and who we're diagnosing and making sure we're doing it more inclusive and getting those supports within the classroom, not
Mhm.
segregated away from everybody
Mhm.
else.
And we do talk about all the time about our Black children, especially our little Black boys being diagnosed so early with different um, diagnoses. I know ODD was running rampant for a while. Every Black boy had ODD, and
And ODD is not covered by IDEA.
no,
ODD is not a
it's
special
not.
education defined
It
term.
it's not. And so a lot of parents were like, all right, I've been diagnosed with my child having ODD. Now what? And then there's no resources, no help, no education on that. But also, again, same arguments, same stuff. We're talking about this even for early care and education. And dare I say, how we punish kids, though we don't like to use that word. And this doesn't just start at kindergarten. This starts really at the preschool level. And I don't think people realize that our kiddos who are starting to be diagnosed at 3 years old and 4 years old going to preschool and they're getting suspended or expelled from preschool, which starts that record of how are they getting assistance and how are the families understanding, how to even navigate the school system or the special education system. And it's a problem. And the stats are not going down.
No, they're going
They
up.
are increasing. And so you're right. We do need to combine our fight on this because it's a joint fight and we have to have that collective power. Mm,
I agree completely. I'm excited about that. You know, you start at a young age, and when you're, it's almost like it's a dual diagnosis type thing.
hmm
You're
hmm
black and disabled at that point. And
Yes.
it has
Yeah.
two negative portrayed labels.
hmm
And when you
hmm
think about how somebody creates their identity, especially at such a young age, when you're told you're because you can't sit still or you have these behavior
Right.
problems, they're just going to exponentially grow over a period of time.
Mhm.
'Cause that student's going to become angrier and more disenfranchised with education.
Yeah. And the parents too. The parents don't want to deal with it. They are already feeling like they are less than. They're already feeling like they're targeted. And as much as we as Black parents talk to our children about what to do or what not to do, and also how to be better and, not do that stuff, we're not going to always just go straight to that special education or IEP route. I've talked to a lot of parents that are like, no, 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 I'm not doing that. I'm not putting my kids in the system that way. We're not going to have this track them through high school and,
Absolutely.
stop them from getting any other opportunities or successes or advantages. And so it's something we really do need to educate on in our community. So because I like to honor time and it's 7:45, one question I always like to ask is how do we go from talking about this, being educated about it, and actually go to movement? I don't want to say allyship because I feel like we have burned that wording to the ground. Everybody feels like they're an ally and they're really not. But how do we get folks having movement around the disability justice world?
I think we need to really shift how we're viewing disability, like how we started, not viewing it as a deficit and viewing it as a positive. And vocabulary and words mean so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
When we're saying things and just the way we're talking about things and talking about disability, it could mean so much. So if we're saying, well, my son needs special education, he's going to be a SPED student at a
Mm-hmm.
very young age, and they suffer from autism, and autism is this negative thing. We're instantly putting them on a track,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if we start viewing disability not necessarily as a negative, and that's where I would love for you all to help kind of spread
Mm-hmm.
that message
Mm-hmm.
that disability is not a problem, it's the systems that we have that are creating these problems.
Mm-hmm.
And if we
Very
shift that dialogue, we're going to make a lot of inroads.
mm-hmm.
And one of my biggest pet peeves is we're not charity cases. And we oftentimes are put in these positions where, and one of the great things about being with Able is I could throw people on and organizations under the bus. But when you look at organizations like Autism Speaks and you see their
Mm,
advertisements and their donations, and it's the little boy with autism staring spacely into the distance, poor kid, we need to support. Here's some money.
mm.
That's not how
Not you naming
disability.
names on my community and conversations.
let you edit that out, right? That's fine. But
No,
whatever, you do
I'm not
you.
going to.
But it's how we view it,
Hmm.
and when we're begging for money, we're viewed, and even at the state house, when we say we need money, we need money, we need money,
Hmm.
and we're saying it because of all these various reasons, it's a civil right, not a charity case.
Right.
Our
Right.
education should be viewed equally as everybody else's.
Hmm.
Our need for support as adults should not be different than the needs of support for others. They don't make them special. Just because I
Right.
require something different doesn't make me special. So even
Hmm.
using that term special is a huge thing, and how we're viewing, education. And here's another point. They recently changed that, but for a very long time, they used the terminology catastrophic aid for students that have that need significant needs for a school district that might cost two, $300,000. They call it catastrophic aid from the state. So you're saying, and imagine being a parent that my child requires catastrophic aid to support him. They're not
Yeah.
a hurricane. They're not a tornado. And we're seeing that these conversations come more and more often right now. And that's one of the biggest concerns we have is that disability is being focused on because the amount of money it costs to support. And it's a lot. I'm not going to beat around the bush with that.
Hmm.
But it's a civil right. It's a
Right.
matter of, my friend getting out of bed so they could go to work and participate in society and their community. It's about receiving the health care that they need to, go to their friend's house and have a Christmas dinner. The things that we all strive for in our lives. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be, please give me more money so I could do this,
Hmm.
you know?
How do folks, and it's one of the things we talk about in BLM a lot, is folks want to be allies and co-conspirators and movement builders, but they don't know how to do that without talking over the folks that you're supposed to be supporting and advocating for. So how does one make sure that they can continue to be the allies that they want to be, but not take control or take the voice of our disabled community?
Got to listen
Hmm.
first and foremost. And listening comes in a lot of different forms. It requires patience. It
Hmm.
requires different form of listening. The point that someone might be making might be missed because of the communication style. If somebody that might be autistic might be very direct with you, or require an augmented communication system, or might prefer to have a conversation not in person but have it virtually because of their, what they need, and giving time for responses.
Yeah.
A lot of disabilities are communication based, and we do need to give space and acceptance to just wait and listen and be patient and
Hmm.
amplify those voices when you hear them. If you have a friend or a neighbor, and most people here, I guarantee, most like, people are affected by this. People and families have loved ones with disabilities all over.
Hmm.
Everyone knows somebody.
Hmm.
And, talk to them like a person, not as a child. That's a big one. Talking down to somebody because they have Down syndrome doesn't mean you have you just talk regular like
Yeah.
regular people.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's a huge pet peeve. You see it out in the community so often too. There was a great film, The Ride Ahead with Sam Habib and Dan Habib, and Sam was talking about his journey. I rewatched parts of it the other day at a conference, and he had politicians, and he had President Biden on there, and President Biden like kissed him on the cheek. This is a 22-year-old man.
Hmm.
Like, who would you kiss me, President Biden, on the cheek when you're talking to? No.
Hmm.
But I think we infantilize so many people with disabilities,
Yeah.
and you really shouldn't be talking down. We should be talking up.
Mm. So if I wanted to help and get involved, how do I do that?
We have a lot of different task forces and very specific things. Housing, I think I went over them before.
Hmm.
But reach out. Our community organizer, Sarah Georges. We have if you want to learn more about how do we advocate with our at the State House, Kristen Evans is a great connection. Just check out our website, go through our social media, or go to one of our events.
Hmm.
We ran a fantastic Disability Pride Parade this summer. We had close to 400 people there, and we got the State House bumping, and we're looking at doubling that this year.
Hmm.
And go to an event, and just have conversations. Be an ally. And I know you're not supposed to use that term, but
Hmm.
but really, what we want is just people that have common goals. So if you know, if you're somehow an expert in housing, contact us. What's your expertise? We need your help.
Yeah.
Join our task force, 1 hour a month. You know, it's not a lot. If you have this background in transportation, we would love your opinions on it. You know, how
Yeah.
can we shape it? We need experts to help educate us. And we will educate you all on disability.
Mhm. And also donate. Donate,
Donate too, that
donate, donate.
helps. That helps. That helps. And you know, I refrain from that. A lot of people with disabilities are on fixed incomes. It's really hard for me to ask for money with that. But yeah, if you have money, donate, that would be great.
Hmm.
But really what I value more than money, and I'm being very honest, is time and energy.
Well,
And
the money you're going to donate to Able, donate that to BLM.
there
No,
you go. But yeah,
I'm,
please donate to us. That would be
mhm.
great.
Yes,
But we need voices and we need advocates alongside us. And you know, we need allies right next to us when we're having these battles. Sorry, I'm using that word and I'm gonna keep using it. You can't tell me what to
that's
do.
fine. That's fine. I just can't stand the word. It's really me. It's not like a world thing. It's
Okay,
me that hates
I
it.
get it.
Because I want people to level up from being an ally, right? I want people to stop feeling secure and safe in the ally space and just say, "Oh, I'm an ally for the disabled community. I'm an ally for the Black community." Show me your actions and show me what else you're doing besides reposting is great. Reposting on social media is great. But what else are you doing for the community? How are you using your dollars? How are you
Yeah,
using your privilege? You know what? How are you speaking up for people? And that's beyond allyship. And so in 2026, as we were coming upon it, which is so quickly, it just felt like it was just Thanksgiving.
please. Yeah.
I want folks to really understand and really think about where they are at in their journey of being in support, engaging with, and advocating for, and going to the level two of allyship, level three, you know, and so going. So that's why I don't like it,
I
but
love that. You know, another step would be if you're going to these meetings and you're advocating for your cause and you look around and you don't see disability there, speak up.
speak up and just email Lewis and be like, Lewis, why weren't you here? Or why didn't you have someone here to support this? So, because again, we do get the emails of why weren't you here? And we're like, we're only one person. But also sometimes we don't know what's happening and where we should be at, where we're needed to be at all the time.
And that's the beauty of what we're doing at Able. We have, you know, a growing base of advocates that could be there, and we want them there.
Right.
And if they're not there, we could help find people and educate people and grow people to be there moving forward.
Wow. Thank you so much for closing out 2025 with us.
Thank you.
This was amazing. I really appreciate it. For folks, we still are going to continue this. January 2026, we'll be back with our next community and conversation. It is always the third Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. With BLM New Hampshire and a community partner. Please follow us on social media for updates. You can find us on YouTube as well under BLM New Hampshire. And you can find this one and all the past community conversations on the YouTube channel. So thank you all for being with us tonight. We appreciate you and have a good holiday.
Thanks, everybody.